Resident Evil 3, the infamous third entry in the series about hot emo vocalists surviving a global health pandemic, aka Mike Kinsella's life right now. Hi, I'm Cole Watson, freelance video boy and emo vocalist aficionado, and I'm here to talk to you today about Resident Evil 3. Now, generally speaking, survival horror games typically don't really appeal to me. Don't get me wrong, I love the horror genre, but having been reared on collectathons and RPGs, which might as well serve as ideological rebuttals to the idea of supply scarcity, anything beyond light survival elements usually isn't my speed. So, why am I taking valuable time out of my otherwise valueless day to talk about Resident Evil? Simple, because Resident Evil rules, and I am of the opinion that the manner in which Capcom has approached the Resident Evil renaissance of the last few years is supremely significant for all of modern gaming. In an era in which eShop shelves are stocked with re-releases, remakes, and nostalgia-tinged spiritual successors, the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3 tower above the rest in their ability to represent not only what made the original releases interesting in the first place, but the progression of both their franchise and horror games at large. As such, in order for us to properly explicate this new RE3 and its overall philosophy, we must first examine the legacy of the original and its significance. In other words, it's time to go all in on Resident Evil 3. For those uninitiated, the development story of the original Resident Evil 3 is one heavily impacted by the rapidly changing gaming industry of the late 1990s. The primary audience for mainstream games was getting older, and they were all hopped up on Mountain Dew and X-Files and needed an artistic medium willing to tackle the refined desires of their horrible nightmare brains. It was a delicate balance for any studio to strike, but strike it Capcom did, with its staggeringly successful and impeccably innovative Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2. But here's the problem. Capcom used more or less the same formula for both of those games, and by the time they had to make a third, the PlayStation 2 had already been announced and was less than a year away. How could they keep fans entertained with a new game on aging hardware that was soon to be usurped by its successor? After they stopped stress-heaving, I assume, execs at Capcom, they kind of just shrugged their shoulders, but miraculously stumbled into what was arguably their best-case scenario. They shelved the third entry they had planned and gave their youngest, least experienced developers the budget and resources to turn the spin-off title they'd been planning into the next mainline release. And it totally worked. Under the guidance of Kazuhiro Aoyama, these freshman devs built off the foundation of the first two titles to create a game that felt fresh, despite running the same game engine and ostensibly the same core gameplay loop. Instead of setting the game inside a single building, the new project was set in Raccoon City, which allowed them to create more diverse environments while retaining the use of pre-rendered backgrounds, or still images. They gave players the ability to quickly pivot and face the opposite direction, giving combat a new sense of urgency without having to completely redesign it. But the biggest and most obvious addition to the franchise was the all-new titular villain, Nemesis. As Shinji Mikami himself put it, Nemesis was so effective because he introduces, quote, a persistent feeling of paranoia. When it disappears after the first confrontation, you live in constant dread of the next attack, end quote. As the nu metal teens of the late 90s would tell you, our imaginations are far more frightening than anything we might reasonably see. So the best way to scare someone is to not scare them, or at least not at every opportunity. This is Psychological Horror 101. It's best to let the idea of something scary linger in the audience's mind long enough for their own anxiety to hyperbolize it, which is torturous, but also a perfect segue into the modern renaissance of Resident Evil. One of the many reasons that Resident Evil 7 was so darn good was because it cleverly used sound design to scare players. Whenever you walk through the halls of the house, you might hear a single floorboard creak somewhere in the distance, subtly piercing the unnerving silence of the spooky set piece. It gets your heartbeat racing because it's just as familiar as it is ambiguous. You know what that sound is, but you have no idea who or what is causing it. It's weaponizing your own familiarity for an enhanced experience. It's really smart design, but it goes much, much deeper than that. The concept I just described to you is not only how Capcom approaches sound design, but it's the entire guiding philosophy behind the Resident Evil remakes. Think about it. It's taking something you've seen before, in this case the entire original game of Resident Evil 3, and drenching that assumed knowledge in ambiguity and subverting your expectations with new gameplay ideas, updated character designs, and of course, massively overhauled visuals and camera controls. This tactic ensures that longtime fans will still have surprises in store, not just despite their familiarity, but because of it. Pretty cool stuff, right? Well, there's still more. You remember how I described the philosophy of the original Resident Evil, I don't know, like 2 minutes ago? Subverting familiarity and assumed knowledge to amplify an acquainted arrangement was also how they made the original Resident Evil 3. Capcom took a game engine and overall structure that we already knew and loved and gave it a fresh coat of paint by making the environments more diverse, the enemies smarter, and combat snappier. They used the audience's familiarity against them for their benefit, and they've done the exact same thing in 2020 with the remake of the game that was built to do just that. It's brilliant and exciting, and everything that most remakes aren't, which is why I think this game is very, very good. So to recap, Resident Evil 3 is the postmodern savior that remake culture desperately needs. It serves its own legacy and the industry at large by enhancing a pre-existing experience by building on the design philosophy of enhancing a pre-existing experience. If you want to pick up a physical or digital copy of this monument to modern game design, head to GameStop.com or your preferred console's online storefront, or simply join the police force of a local zombie-infested city, breeze through your 15-minute training, and creatively slaughter the living dead until you inevitably get bored and concede to going home and playing Resident Evil 3. And hey, if you want to hear more of me in your free time, for whatever reason, head to youtube.com/Nugatory videos, where I do video essays and original music and all kinds of other fun stuff. Yeah, okay, well, I'm done talking now, so I'm just gonna go ahead and, yeah, okay.